Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders can look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. Building products is such a fun journey, especially if users are involved early on and it feels like you're co creating with them all the way through. But there's also racing against all the advancements in technology thanks to AI's hypergrowth every single day. So, how do you balance this ride and the race? And, when do you know it's time to take a dive or a turn? And how do you just account for the change of markets? We'll be chatting all about that because I've got my favorite product person here with me, Yana Welinder. Yana is the founder and CEO of Kraftful, an AI Copilot that helps teams build better products by listening to user feedback. A YC alum and a Stanford fellow, she formerly led product teams at IFTTT, Carbon, and Wikimedia Foundation. Yana loves backing up founders, and she currently runs GenAIFounders community, and she also invests into promising ideas via Pioneer Fund. A true 0 to 1 person and an amazing friend that I've got in the product community. Hi, Yana. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Really, really excited to chat.
Awesome. So, Yana, it's so wonderful to draw a pattern from tech and policies and law to now product management and entrepreneurship. So, talk to us about what brought you into this tech journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So my path into product and tech wasn't really straightforward. So I guess kind of stepping back. So I grew up in Sweden and ended up going to college in London and then living in Dublin, Ireland for a while and working there. And then ultimately coming out to the US for grad school. But most of my early career was in law. As you mentioned. And so I spent a few years practicing law, mostly in tech law, and then ultimately discovered that actually I have a kind of a very different approach to law. And my view on law was really that I wanted to kind of reshape law, rethink how it works. And so I went back to school. I got my third law degree. I got a LLM from Harvard. And but now, sort of in the age of large language models, LLMs mean something very different.
I was just getting that. I'm like, but the LLMs that we know of now is a very different term in the dictionary.
Yes, absolutely. It's a master's degree in law, which is sort of interesting in law because I already had a doctorate degree. So after that, I got this master's degree, but it was an academic degree, which then allowed me to go into academia. So after that, I did a kind of short stint in academia. I was a visiting assistant professor, and I got to do some of the early thinking around policy in the AI space, and specifically computer vision. So I published some of the earliest pieces on computer vision and AI policy implications in the Harvard Journal of Law and Technology. I did a chapter on the same topic in Cambridge Handbook of Consumer Privacy. But ultimately, most of my research then ended up focusing on how to regulate technology, not through law, but through norms and technical restrictions. And specifically, I was thinking about, is there ways we can replace all of the small print that exists online, a user experience that sets expectations around what's going to happen so that users can experience what's going to happen in the product, through the product itself, and never have to read the small print, which I think, if we everyone sort of acknowledges that most people actually ultimately do not read.
True.
And then that's kind of, I got to apply some of that research at the Wikimedia Foundation, and ultimately brought me into product. And that's when I had this realization that I'm much more interested in actually building products to shape and change the world than doing it through law. And that's how I got here. And then I spent lots of years in B2B, B2B2C, and B2C, doing various types of products, and now I'm here building a product.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you said it's a very unconventional road to tech, I can only imagine what kind of twists and turns it had. And for me, it's so much heartening to listen to these kind of stories where you generally don't start with tech, but then there are like multiple paths that just bring you into tech naturally. And there's so much of relativity with, especially I know we've had chats in the past where we discussed about designing policies that just helps people have a kind of an inclusive user experience. And that's what I think also brought you to build Kraftful in the first place. So it's amazing that where it started to where it is now, there's so much of, you know, connectivity in terms of helping users use the best parts of the product, and whether that's through law, helping, design policies, or whether it's through directly building out these experiences. I think ultimately it's just making enjoyable experiences for users. So I'm glad you're building Kraftful for PMs like me and like a bunch of others in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we as you mentioned, we started in a somewhat different place. It was always a product for product managers, but originally it was specifically a product for IoT product managers. And we built out kind of a first standardized user experience, then with analytics, and ultimately started using large language models to help analyze user feedback. And I think that was sort of a really interesting piece to see as we started getting pull for, at that point, it was sort of just like one feature in our big product. And we started getting market pull for that from the broader product community. And it was just kind of interesting to see how that can happen in a much more sort of organic way, which is something that I was really excited to then, okay, let's double down and build out this product and make sure that it really solves all of the different problems that I had as a product manager.
Yeah, no, such an important point. And I think as PMs, there's so much focus, and I think it's always like a Bible point that folks say about, okay, listen to what your market is saying, listen to what users are saying, and then use that as a way to align your direction. And in fact, that's something that, having followed Kraftful's journey from the beginning, I think I have this question to you about, there are many internal and external factors that influence the path to building a product. And it's very crucial, especially if you're in the early stage, and especially in your case where you had turned from a completely IoT based market to AI's GPT. And what moments and signals did you notice that made you think that, hey, it's the right time to pivot? And, how did you get this all together?
Yeah, so I think there are like two things in particular that really made me ultimately kind of focus on this particular product. One had to do with kind of just like the how the technology evolved. So when I started observing that large language models got good enough at text summarization, and the second was around kind of that market pull when we started seeing that the broader PM community were interested in the solution, which really just reminded me of all the pain points that I had as a PM in various roles, not just in IoT, but specifically around kind of the technology evolution. So when I first experimented with large language models, sort of in early 2020, and it's really the very, like what we do today, which is summarize lots and lots of user feedback with large language models. That's the first use case that I applied LLMs to when I kind of just started tinkering. And my conclusion was that, this technology is amazing at generating text, but it's just not great at summarization quite yet. There's some things that could be, I just didn't feel like this is actually a product that I would use as a PM myself if I use it. So I built the first prototype back in early 2020. I decided that, okay, actually technology isn't there yet. Let me wait. And I kept checking in. And so around 2021 was actually somewhere before then when I discovered now it's getting good enough where if you massage the models in various ways, you can get some valuable stuff out of it. So we launched in our product just as a feature in 2021. But back then it was still a very small piece. And it wasn't until like DaVinci 3 launched in the fall of 2022, like last fall, essentially, that I realized that actually now's the time. Now models are getting powerful enough to solve this problem in a really meaningful way. We actually architected even that feature that ended up being kind of what Kraftful is today. It doesn't share any code with what that original feature was, because it's just a very, very different solution now because of how powerful the new models are compared to what it used to be.
Yeah. And I'm actually glad that you kind of did the experimental way to understand if it really sticks with people. And that's very important, because I think when the product is already serving a certain market and you have actual users, there are times that we think, oh my God, I think the product could actually do something else. But when there are users, it's important to also take their needs into consideration. And I think I'm very curious in this part. Did you kind of have this fear that, oh, what would users say? Or let's say I'm just going to pivot the product now. So how would they react? Was that a thing that you always had in mind? Or, how, as a founder, what did you really feel about this whole scenario just unraveling in front of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I had lots of hesitation around it. So one thing I did was a lot, like when I started getting this sense of just market pull towards this one feature, I did some stuff to validate that from outside of the folks that we were demoing it to, because I always have this sense that if you demo a product to users, there's, they may tell you the right things, but it may also be biased. And so I tried to get a sense for, would people be interested in this outside of our actual user base? And so around that time, I rarely go to conferences. I feel like it's usually a waste of time for founders. But I did go just around
Quite
that time.
controversial.
Yeah, it is quite controversial. I'm very like building focused. So unless there's going to be a ton of people in the audience who are my likely users, I'm not like, I'm just going to be like, what's the biggest impact? Probably building.
Absolutely.
Like,
Fair enough. Fair
something
enough.
around building. But in this particular case, I went to a couple of conferences. I went specifically around that time. I went to the Masters of Scale Summit, and so that was there were it was like by invitation only, so it was just founders, and there were like a handful of product leaders there, and I pitched. I didn't pitch, but I introduced myself as Yana, founder of Kraftful, and the tagline for Kraftful was sort of what Kraftful does today, as opposed to what it did back then. And I didn't really pitch it in any sort of like specific sense. I just waited to hear what sort of feedback will I get from people. And what I heard back was kind of just like, people telling me about their pain points. So they'd be like, oh, our CS team, they will just like push their agenda when they're summarizing user feedback. And it's never the things like the features that actually would be helpful to build. It's really what will like easier for them to respond to customer complaints. Or, we like the PM team has been trying to get at the user feedback, but they're not getting access to the, our Zendesk account, so they can never really listen. Like they're like all of these very specific pain points that came through kind of organically in those conversations. And there was like, I think the TechCrunch conference was happening at this, like literally that same week. And so there were like a handful of events where I could just do this. And so I had maybe like, I don't know, like 30 or 40 conversations that were kind of like that. And that was sort of like for me, the validation. Okay, this is the thing. We can focus on it. But then I still was worried about, kind of to your point, what are my existing users going to do when I turn off this product? And so I dreaded that for like, and then when I wrote the email to users. I sat on that email for a very long time. I ran it through ChatGPT many times over and over again. Can I like, there's some better way I can do this? And then I ultimately sent out the email, and the responses from our existing users were amazing. Like, people were just excited about what we were building, wanted to try out the new product. And and I don't know, I was very, very nervous about that because our previous product did have a major integrations component to it. So it
Yeah.
just required a lot of work to get up and running. But yeah, our users ended up being very, very supportive. And so that was great. I think the piece that I learned from that is that it's really important to have a user community around your product.
For sure.
Your users aren't just users, but they feel like they're part of the community where they're kind of like behind this company because they believe in this company's mission and they like how the company is run. I think they're going to be much more open to, you know, products being sunset and trying out the new product that's sort of essentially solving, it's on the same mission, but still means that the work that they put in is they can leverage.
Yeah. I think you just summarized what I was, just going to say in terms of how having an early believer community, just taking part in your vision and trying to just stay on and give you the kind of candid feedback. It's so much necessary, especially if you're building 0 to 1 and just testing out these ideas. They just, are the sounding board you need to uh, kind of like just put these ideas out and then see if it really sticks. And such is the power. And I think a lot of people confuse building a community with sort of like thinking that, oh, just increasing the number of people in the community is the only goal. But having that quality community in terms of people who are willing to extend hand and people who would love to, sit down with you and help you chart that feedback, it's so much necessary. And I think it's very evident in Kraftful's case where you just had this whole thing happening. And oh my God, I love that exercise. I think to me, it sounded more like an exercise that you did with these conferences. It brought me back to one of the things that Ariel Jackson, who is the marketer in residence at First Round Capital, she was on the show a couple of episodes before. And then we chatted about this concept called the bar test, which is kind of like a fancy, cool way for you to sit down at the bar and like just start this conversation around your product brand and say, hey, did you get to know about this brand A? It does this. And then you stop there and then expect the other person to fill in the gap and say, oh, that's a cool product. And I know this is how you do it. And then just keep continuing the conversation and sort of like take it in a very casual way. So you get to know what other people talk about your brand. And I think here, what you said just sounds exactly similar, but more in a PM way where you just stop with the tagline or you just say, hey, I'm doing AI Copilot for PMs. And then you stop there. And then there's like so much of feedback and so much of pain points that people will discuss with you. And that's like a super cool experiment. Like I'm so pumped up to try it like the next time I'm at a conference or I'm actually talking to a bunch of founders and PM folks. So for everybody who's listening, I think this is a very fancy, cool way to just test it out with your friends and their community folks.
Yeah, it's very similar to sort of like the online, I guess, the online equivalent of like the landing page test, except you have no way of really knowing why someone went to a landing page. So if you can be there in front of if you can be the landing page in front of a person and see what they will tell you and what emotion they will like communicate to you when they're telling you about their pain point, right? Like it'd be something that's like fairly shallow point, or will they be like very passionate about this? Oh my God, I need this. And here's why,
Yeah, no, it's like a live graph that you can just plot through, say, hi, I think this person was really passionate when they actually asked for this feature. And then like, you kind of like root it back. So absolutely. And now I think in these contexts, talking to people in person through these events really would, add value. But totally otherwise with you on the building focus stuff, because I think that's where the whole root of what you do lies.
Very cool. Yeah. I'm excited for us to try it out.
Yeah. So now that we're talking about getting feedback from people, I know you do something, I would even call this the Yana exercise, because it's so cool to see the way you're initiating social chats around product practices, product management questions, and all of that on Twitter. It's like you just wake up and then you see Yana's tweet. I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to go and put my response there and meet fellow people there. And it's like it just builds a whole new world of conversations. So what made you start this social chat kind of a thing for PMs? And are you excited to see how it's turning out every single day?
Yeah. So I think that was sort of a realization, completely unrelated realization. It's just that the more our brand, or me through like our brand through me is visible on Twitter, the more users we get. Because to the point of the kind of the previous, because everyone, we're just hearing the tagline, know that they have the pain point, and it's just like, it's such an obvious pain that the only thing we need to do is to be very visible. And so the way I first saw that had nothing to do with my products, like PM questions, or really anything that I do on Twitter. I tweeted about non-alcoholic beer, which I am passionate about. And because I love beer, I hate alcohol. And in a bunch of people who also like non-alcoholic beer and had also been following like the new types of non-alcoholic beers that started popping up, particularly kind of like in California and in Canada around that time, and in Colorado, I guess, started responding to the thread and like recommending their beer, and we saw, and this is before we had launched this version of Kraftful in beta. We were kind of like stealthy launched in alpha, like you could sign up, but we didn't talk about it. What we noticed was a bunch of people signed up, and so we realized that the reason they signed up was they engaged with my non-alcoholic beer tweets, and then they looked at my profile and saw that I worked at Kraftful, and they went to see what Kraftful does. They saw the tagline, and they had the pain point, and so they signed up. So we're like, okay, clearly, all we need to do is to talk about. We don't need to like the organic way of getting attention is not to necessarily like promote Kraftful per se, but to talk about the things people care about. So what do our users care about? They care about product management practices because they're product managers, right? And so that was sort of like, how do I create a space for people to talk about the things they're interested in, and do it in an organic way, which obviously is a very organic thing for me to do because I am interested in it too. So it's sort of like, how, what sort of conversations would I be interested in having on Twitter? Can I be the person crafting those, right? So then I started doing that. Now there's sort of like, it's a whole mechanism. I usually write my tweets on Sunday nights when I'm the most rested. and then they go out on a daily basis, but I don't actually write them that morning unless there's something timely, and then I will like interrupt the flow and add some. But generally speaking, people have asked a lot, like, is this like, how do you do this? Like, what's this is a lot of tweets. For a founder, how do you have time? Well, I actually do time for it. It's like a whole Sunday afternoon of crafting.
Now we got a peek into your schedule. You're like, Yana spends Sunday evening crafting all of these tweets. So it's actually timed, and it's actually like given the right mind space to think about.
Yeah. And I tried to think about like, when would I care about this kind of stuff? Like some things I would care about specifically on a Monday morning, some things I would care about like on hump day, like in my product journey, when would I have cared about certain topics? Like when would I have done certain things? When would I have done like deep dive product work versus like kind of more like just trying to keep up with meetings and that kind of stuff. So I think I'm trying to make sure that everything is still timely for people, even though it is written on a Sunday afternoon.
No, I think you made a wonderful statement about the whole, what do my users care about? Because it's not just from a social engagement front, but I think the very core purpose of building the product out is always to understand why does my user engage with this product, and like what do they really want from it. And I think that's very reflective. And just as you say, I'm going back to like the number of times that I've engaged with the tweet, and I've also like had so many mutual benefits from reading what other fellow PMs have tweeted about in that. And it's like I just get a free pass into understanding, oh, that's nice, like somebody shares the same opinion as I do, or there's like this whole, oh, I never thought about it from that angle, and it's kind of nice to see another PM talk about it. So I think at the end of the day, it builds that healthy conversation, and the whole community thing that we're talking about, it builds this whole engagement community, and I think it's very fascinating in that sense. And wow, when the whole world is thinking about meme marketing, meet Yana, who is going to like talk to you about non-alcoholic beer marketing. And I'm so fascinated like how that kind of like just kicked off, and it's a very interesting way. It reminds me of how people initially used TikTok as a way, like all these SaaS companies used to go and say, if you thought TikTok was just for like fancy, funny videos, then you're thinking it wrong. and people started posting product demos and ways to like figure out their engagement on TikTok. So I think it kind of takes me back and reminds me of, if you find a very unique way to get people to notice what you're doing, I think then like nothing could stop you. So non-alcoholic beer it is. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've since seen people record videos of Kraftful and share them on various channels, and so we've kind of seen like there was one day when a bunch of people signed up in Brazil, and we were sort of like, what is happening? Like, we're off the hook. And so we kind of searched and discovered that this one influencer in Brazil just did a demo of Kraftful, shared it on
Oh,
Instagram,
so cool.
and a bunch of people signed up. And so like I think that comes from just having an authentic community, right? Like people who are just engaging in conversations and knowing that we're like people building the product, they're like they really care about it. And so like I think our community are excited to then go and share it with their community, right? So that's kind of what
Yeah,
I'm really excited
very
about.
organic. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's the best form of feedback any founder and any PM could get, is seeing your users happily share, something that they enjoyed in the product and like bringing in through word of mouth. And I think that's the best form of engaging with the community for sure.
Yeah. And this is sort of like the new age, right? Like how
Mm.
how things just organically happen, which is a really, really exciting time to
Yeah, yeah.
PM, I think.
Yeah, no, certainly. I agree with you there. Like we're talking about the way that we're engaging with people, and this whole time where you wrote to the current users and you were so relieved to hear back from them that, hey, we're with you on this journey. But there's also like the other side to think about, in the sense that there's always evolving customer needs. So I have this question on how often should PMs and especially founder turned PMs like you should look up at product strategy and constantly like revisit this, because I feel like the rate at which we are building these days is no longer going by the playbook, but it's like rewriting the complete playbook. And at times it's not even a play or a book, it's just like trying to just go with the whole flow. So what would you suggest doing when the markets are just going berserk and you're like, hey, like this is what we have to do when this is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are in this time where there's really never been anything equivalent to this. I think people are talking about this being equivalent to like when the web was introduced, or like things were going online, or when like with mobile phones and things going mobile first. And I think that the one distinguishing difference between that time and what we're seeing right now is that every one of those changes required people to procure some hardware to be able to actually benefit from the change. And so people had to go and get an iPhone and ultimately get an Android phone. Before that, had to be able
True.
to get online. Now we have this AI change, and obviously the technology is changing at a fast pace, and it's going to continue changing at a much faster pace, just because the technology is amplifying itself, right? So like the AI is getting more powerful, then the AI is going to make the AI, and like that's going to move even faster, right? So there's that. But then on the other side is kind of the human adoption of the technology. And the difference there is that with like specifically looking at ChatGPT was sort of like the big change, where like lots of people were using GPT-3 powered products before, but I think the really big change was when everyone started using ChatGPT over just like the first month.
Yeah.
And that was just like it was a free web product that you could just sign up and start using, right? So it was just like so different from any one big technological change that had previously happened, and it was available in 100 plus languages. Everyone could talk to it. There was no barrier. Young people could do it, old people could do it, people could do it in their own language at their own time. It was no localization was needed, right? So it's just like suddenly this complete rapid change in how people interacted with the world and thought about the world. And so now all of these individuals who previously would have taken some time to become mobile first, now they've become AI first in almost instantly. My point with this is that there's the technology is changing really rapidly. The human behavior is changing really rapidly. And as a result, as a product builder, you kind of need to revisit your assumptions constantly. I do think that, like, if you have a vision in mind for your product, that vision probably conceptually will stay true through all of those changes. Like for us, it's kind of like, the Copilot for product builders to help them build better products. That's going to be the case for as long as there's product builders building products, right? Maybe with super intelligence there isn't, but who knows? But until we get to that point, that's going to be still the truth. But what the physical form of our product, like what the look and feel of our product's going to be, will very much depend on how people interact with AI over time. And that could be very different in, like a year from now, but even in just like 6 months from now, it could be that actually everyone interacts with their tools through ChatGPT and everything's a plugin, right? For example, it doesn't have to, we do have a plugin for that reason, but it could also just be something very different, right? Like it could be kind of more of a per type experience where you're interacting with various agents that are doing things on your behalf. And so I think as a product manager, you have to as a product manager or entrepreneur, you have to revisit, what is my product in this world today when people are interacting with technology in this way? What should my product do? And then similarly revisit it probably, on a weekly or monthly basis and see, are my assumptions still correct? Is it moving in a different direction? It just means that you'll end up building in a slightly different way. I think it means that you have to build everything a little bit more rapid iteration, of course, but also doing everything kind of more in an MVP way, be heavily focused on sort of more API, where you're making the actual user experience a little bit more open-ended, where you can change the user experience faster, but the core of the product is sort of there. So I think there's just like some ways to adjust for this new reality where both kind of behavior and technology is changing rapidly.
I think when you do that, it also tells you what not to focus on, in the sense that you decide that, hey, if this is going to take so much time, or it's just that it's not aligned with the market that we're solving for, then I think revisiting also gives sometimes the clarity to say no to a few things and then just focus on the very few things that could have been put on the back seat before, but now it's forward because you decided that this is no longer, staying in the same line that you want to focus on. So I think that is also something that could come out as new learnings for product builders. And the fact that you were talking about the time frame is so true, because back then when we always had to talk about, oh, this is when floppy disks went as CDs, or this is when we had this whole .com bubble happening through, and all of these is like a certain time frame and like a certain month or a year that we can go and quote. But when it comes to this whole AI thing that we are in, it's the fact that if AI could have been there for 2 decades, but still a kid or even my grandma could actually talk about AI now, it's the fact that it's just become so much of a user experience. Because for times to believe, I think AI was always considered as a thing that, oh, I think if you want to go into research, then you sit in labs and you work on AI stuff. You just sit with computers and machines and then you work on AI stuff. But then now it's like, okay, I think whatever I'm using in the web is AI. Like if I can just use AI to summarize stuff, or if I can just use to generate new text, it is AI. And I think people are just coping up with the whole fact that anything that you can generate, and it's just at a stone's throw away in terms of like getting whatever you want, and all of this is with AI, just makes them feel so powered, in the sense that, oh, it's no longer the people with the machines that will have to play around with AI, but then I can do it and you can do it, and like everybody keeps talking about it. So I was actually very happy to see the whole user experience part play out with what ChatGPT did, because there was this point in time that everybody was talking about ChatGPT, and it was not because it was just AI powered, it's because it was so accessible for people, and it was just like a thing that people could take and immediately use. So that the comparing this with this whole time frame thing, I feel that now every month there's a new thing to catch up with. There are like new learnings to go through, so there's no longer like a singular time frame that we can talk about. If let's say a decade from now people would say like, hey, we have this whole AI shift that was happening in product space. I'm pretty sure they're not going to go and talk about the time LLMs were just so popular, let's say in 2018, 19, or the time that GPT was like just started through. But I think this whole decade is just going to be like a time of just rapid, newer findings and newer stuff coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, like it's going to be like when you zoom out, what is it going to look like, right? Like
Yeah.
what was the big shift in essentially human amplification, right? With
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah. No, that's very apt on. And I think it's just for me it always feels like we're just getting started through, and with every time you think how AI could just intertwine with product stuff or with art and with so many other streams, I think the possibility is only very exciting. And this also this whole different school of thought, where people always say that, oh, AI is just going to like replace work and people, and then it's just going to take jobs away. But I also see that beyond all of these different schools of thoughts, as somebody who's working with AI every day, is there something that you think would grow out to be bigger as tech advances, let's say a decade from now or like a couple of years from now, something that you think is very less evident but could actually play out to be great in the upcoming times?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the lens through which you're looking at this. And so specifically from a product lens, right? Like I think for the product builder experience, I do think that's the really exciting pieces that is really going to amplify product managers in product builders. But I think the other aspect of it is that kind of as a counterexample to AI replacing humans, because I think in the product building space it will replace a lot of human labor, but what it actually will do is create lots of opportunities for product builders, which I'm really excited by. And I think what it is that when you can create a company that's partially powered with AI in certain ways, right? Like you don't need to hire for all the different roles that you have, but you can use AI for a lot of different aspects. You can create a much leaner company, and as a result, it ends up being much less capital intensive. What that means is that you don't necessarily need to pitch it to investors the same way you previously had to. And that means that but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be like a venture scale business eventually. It can still be a venture scale business, but it doesn't need to look like a venture scale business at the time when you're starting it. So suddenly all of these ideas for problems that need to be solved in the world entrepreneurs can go and start solving those problems with much less capital, because they don't need to go to persuade investors to come on that journey. So I think what we'll end up kind of the ultimate outcome of this is that we'll end up having a bunch of venture scale businesses that aren't necessarily venture backed or not as much venture backed, and as a result we'll end up having many more businesses. And at the core of those businesses, you still need to have product builders, humans. You'll need much less of them, but there's going to be just so many more businesses solving lots and lots of problems, everything that's previously has been thought of like the fringe or minority problems, like products for minorities, wink wink. Not actually minorities, right? It's half the population.
Yeah.
But there's just so many pain points that still have not been addressed because it's been hard to get funding for those ideas. But there's still big ideas with big market opportunities, and entrepreneurs will go after those ideas now, and they will be able to build smaller companies in terms of how many people work at those companies, but there's going to be so many more companies to go and work at for product builders and do more exciting work, because ultimately a lot of kind of the tedious work will be automated, and will be able to kind of be much more strategic. So I think that's kind of what we will see in terms of what kind of our profession, how that's going to change.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation. And I think if I have to equate it with this whole example, when no code and when this whole factor about microsas came through, I think it just democratized a lot of people to just believe in the fact that when they have good ideas, the MVPs or just getting that idea out was much simpler because you now had blocks and easy ways to just assemble and sort of like build the stuff that you wanted and see if it's really sticking out with the audience. And I think, like you just mentioned, the same thing goes with AI because it opens up newer markets and it also like gives you suddenly this whole path towards, oh, I didn't have solution to this prior, but now I feel like there's some sort of a way that I can go through, and I can like just envision this whole thing from what you said in terms of some of them can be venture back, some of them can be bootstrap, but I think at the end of the day it just puts so many people back at the helm of building stuff out. And I love how this whole, are you a PM, are you a PMM, all of this just like blurs into, are you a product builder at heart, like are you somebody who really loves turning ideas into reality, and are you somebody who would want to believe in the purpose of building it out and just have to work with the audience and get things shipped. So I think just boils down to that, and whatever name you want to give to those roles, it's absolutely fine. I think we already just rode the whole wave of Airbnb saying no PMs, yes PMs. So I think the whole role and everything aside, I just feel that everybody becomes builders at heart. And it's just so exciting to think about the fact that there'll be newer products and newer markets. And yeah, that part is definitely exciting.
I think the Airbnb example is a particularly interesting one because it's sort of like with Brian Chesky saying, we did away with the product manager function. Now product managers are at the same level as designers, and they're now product marketers. So clearly, like, he had this whole vision of like how in the really big way in which it changed. And then I think Lenny was sharing on Twitter that actually, like, we changed titles from product manager to product marketer, so we got to do some more product marketing roles, but we didn't do anything less. Like, we didn't actually give away anything. Design was sort of like the implied between the lines. And the interesting thing I think in all of that is how, like, there's this, when you have these giant companies, there's the intent at the top, Brian's intent, and then what actually happens on the ground different. And so, like, ultimately nothing changed, right? And that in that context, nothing really seemed to have changed.
Yeah.
But now there's this rapid change that's happening with new startups that are actually like reinventing product management from the ground up. And that there you actually have this kind of, as you're saying, like, it doesn't matter. Is that a product manager, is a product marketing manager? Like, it's a product builder that will do lots of things to make things happen, to make products happen.
Yeah.
And so, like, so these like big companies are trying to make shifts, may not actually be doing it, but actually, like, side by side with that, this whole change of like the profession just being changed from the ground up. And that's happening really rapidly. So I think that's a really interesting kind of like place and time where there's just a lot of change happening.
Yeah. No, I think this whole parallel take in terms of companies trying to go through this wave, and then there's also like newer teams and newer startups coming through. It's only we'll have to probably wait it out and see, because I think the possibility and potential that it can get through is great. And how many of us would be able to see the other side, and like what kind of learnings we pick up from this is what would make the whole journey fun. So I'm more excited to see how things go by in that pace.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited to be able to like tell the story after the fact, to see like what how did that take up.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a better way out, because I think you live the experience and then you sort of like pass it on and like get this whole community to understand what you've been through. So yeah.
Yeah, really.
So yeah. No, for me, when I'm talking about community, I really have to touch upon the Gen AI founder community that you've been working on? Because I think we're all navigating this whole LLM space and there's so much uncertainty. I think we talk about tokens, embeddings, context windows, and all of this are from the model's perspective. So apart from that, there's also like a lot to know as a new founder. And now we're talking about product builders who could be from the tech background or who's not from a tech background but somebody who's passionate about solving for a space. I think it's important to have this close knit group to be able to share knowledge, learnings, and challenges. So what have you been doing up with Gen AI founder community, and could you tell us more about that, who are all a part of it and what's really happening in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like we started it, I'm trying to remember, I think it was sort of like in March or April, and really Emilia Lynn and I looked around and we're like, there's a bunch of Gen AI communities popping up, but none of them are sort of like addressing our needs as founders specifically, because a lot of the discussion there is kind of like a lot of tinkering with Gen AI, which we've done too, but now we're building products, and so we have a specific set of things that we would like to discuss with Gen AI founders, and it's around specifically how do I build a product, how do I scale that Gen AI product, and then how do I pitch this Gen AI product to investors, because that's a whole different problem to solve, because AI investors are used to being pitched more traditional AI products, and so they have these like questions that don't actually work with how Gen AI technology works. So that was sort of like the kind of the problem space, and I ended up kind of just like tweeting a invitation for folks to like sign up to see how it's similar to like my usual like validation techniques. Like, well, people will be interested. I tweeted about it, and within like 24 hours, we had like over 100 applicants sign up, founders from various. I mean, a lot of them were YC founders, because I think that's coming through the YC community also, but also just generally. And so then, like within a couple of days, we had hundreds of folks signing up for this, and we launched the community maybe like a few days after that initial tweet. And the really interesting thing was, and we sent out invites to folks who had signed up, and we're sort of like very specific about this. This needs to be a founder, and it needs to be someone building with Gen AI. We had lots of other folks sign up who were neither one or the other, and we have to be kind of a little bit more picky about to make sure that we get that quality discussion from people that are specifically in that problem space, because otherwise you kind of end up having conversations going in different directions.
Gets digressed.
And one thing was kind of just like how passionate that community has been. There's now every day it's a Slack group I wake up to, just like lots of, because it is a global community, so there's lots of discussion happening already by the time West Coast wakes up. And and it's just like with every change, now that Llama 2 launched this week, had a conversation around how do we adopt that into our products. Is it good enough? Is it not? How does it compare to GPT 3.5 and GPT-4? Not so well for zero shot applications. So for lots of commercial applications, not going to work. But like having those conversations and be able to get advice. I've gotten some of the best kind of like scaling advice from that group, specifically when we were sort of like hitting the limit of what we could do with just like GPT-4 token per minute limits. I got really good advice in the community. Have you tried distributing your traffic between OpenAI and Azure, which we ended up going and doing and that helped us for a while until we then hit the next limit. But it's been incredibly powerful to just be able to have this knowledge base of people to go and ask very specific questions that are all focusing on the same specific problems.
And I love how it gets very candid, because I think whenever people talk about founders, they always expect especially when you're building out something new, it's always like you have to come from the tone of knowing everything and like, trying to be like, oh, if you're a founder, you just have to figure it out. And it's like you should always have answers. But when most of my experiences of talking to founders, I love the fact that they are willing to say, hey, I just don't know this. And if there's somebody that I can talk to, I'd love to do it. And as PMs, I think that's what we do every day in our jobs, right? Like we are more open to learning newer information. And I think the more we are curious about how to do something is when we get better at it. So for me, it sounds more like the kind of safe space that you can be in, where you can get answers to a lot of questions you have. At the same time, just use everybody's collective information, and like just get super smart people up in a room, and it's like just like prodding and asking them questions and like figuring out, hey, could you like help me here? And I think it all sounds like very inclusive and so heartwarming, in the sense that people are willing to spend time. And like it's a lot of them talk about the fact that people in when you work in tech, you just don't have time for anything else, and you're just so putting your head down, build sort of a thing. But I think people are very kind, and especially when you are in tech and when you are building out a community, I think people are more kind and more willing to help each other than we think. So that I think is very reflected through the whole explanation that you just gave about the community.
Yeah. I think the other piece, I think, yeah, definitely people are very generous with their time and wanting to provide advice to each other. The other, the other reality of this is that I think almost every single company in that group, I'm sort of looking at them and being like, oh, I want them to succeed so I can use that product. Like
Yes.
they're all gonna like
Genuinely.
charge my company too, right? Like the B2B ones in particular, or even there's some folks building kind of like educational tool for kids. I'm kind of like, oh, this is really cool. I signed up for some of them for my son. So I think it's just like a lot of exciting things being built. So you're just like almost selfishly wanting everyone to succeed. Use all of those products.
Yeah, I think you just become beta testers of each other's products very organically. And I think like I've always believed that as a product builder, there's so much joy in being able to just root for somebody, like just be happy about somebody's success in the space, and just like kind of not expect anything, but just keep supporting people through their journeys. And I think that's the best form of celebration that you could have. And I think it like, I'm so glad that you're part of a community that does that. So yeah, I'm very happy for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been incredibly rewarding too. Yeah, and as you say, as a founder, you just have very, very limited time. So to be able to do something that just feels great, that's been great.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. So Yana, like I have got one more last question for you, which is, as an artist, how do you see this whole talk around generative AI, trying to use tools like Midjourney and getting different sort of artworks out there? I know it's all like a form of augmenting your creativity, but there are like, when I meet people, they're like, hey, Aishwarya, you're into art, but how do you actually see this? Are you feeling contentious, or do you think this is really going to help your creativity? So there's always buzz around this topic. So I would love to pick an artist's brain here and see what you think about this.
Yeah. I love it. I think, when some of these tools, like when Dolly first launched, or didn't even launch, I think I got to be an early tester, and I went really deep and just started making lots and lots of art.
I know, I've seen that, all the Dali tweets that you used to put. Yeah, correct.
And the thing for me was, around that time, obviously, being a founder, I didn't have a whole lot of time to create art. So this is like a very quick way for me to get some of that creativity out. And so it made me much more creative at a time when I wouldn't have time to be creative. And so it does. So in that sense, I felt amplified to create more art. But over time, I think one thing that I've discovered is that I think you can use these tools in so many different ways. You can use the tool to create the end product of art, like the actual art piece. You can also use it just as a tool, for prototyping art, art ideas, right? You can quickly get at a prototype, and then that can ultimately be what you end up painting or not painting, because actually you feel like that experiment isn't going in the direction you want it to go. I think it's just the way I think about it is really just like while this all plays into this bigger AI change that's happening when we think about what is this kind of analogous to specifically for art, I think about this being very similar to a camera, and when the camera was introduced, because that created the field of photography, so completely different art form, right? People creating art with a camera. Now suddenly people are creating art with various AI tools. So there's that. But I also think it's the other interesting piece of that was how photography or the camera impacted all the other art forms around that, right? Because prior to that, a big piece, like most art was in realism, and what ended up happening was that the artists who didn't become photographers but continued painting primarily then started doing a lot of abstract art as a different way of expressing their ideas and evoking emotions in different ways, because realism was not as compelling anymore because you had photography, which was much more realistic. So I think that's going to be the really interesting thing, is to see how does AI push artists to be creative in other ways and essentially create human experiences that AI cannot do, right? So that there's going to be kind of some sort of counterpoint to that. And I'm really interested to see what that ends up being. That's not going to be as quick of a change, but we'll probably end up what that is eventually.
Yeah, like sort of rekindle the imaginative pieces and I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a newer medium or a newer form of expressing ideas and thoughts. And then there's like a whole category of things that would just come through the medium. So I think that part is definitely exciting, like you said. And to me, I think what is also equally fascinating is how when photography was introduced and when anything that was just put out as a piece of creativity, there was always this tackling issue on copyright and the way that who does this art belong to. And as an artist, I think people always took pride in saying, hey, I did that piece, and it's my work and it's my sort of creativity. So now I'm more excited to see that, as much as like one part of it is using tools like DALI or Midjourney and most of the other visual creative tools to just flesh out our ideas. Sometimes you also wonder, if I'm able to do like a piece of art, like a comic book or a totally new painting, what does copywriting look like, and who does it belong to? And when I also saw that companies like Shutterstock is actually entering into deals with OpenAI, and they're really not focusing much on the whole who does this copyright belong to, because that's what photography business was all about through the day. It was always like attributing it back to the photographer. So I think that part is very exciting for me as an artist, to see that it's just leveraging and augmenting creativity. At the same time, it's also opening room to a totally different idea about a nameless and an anonymous sort of a thing for creativity. So
yeah. The interesting thing is that while we are seeing a big change, there's copyright law already has something really a good framework for dealing with all of this, which is fair use, that applies broadly to art, where you're not strictly, when you're not taking one painting and copying it exactly, but you are creating your own expression of that, because good artists steal or whatever, right? Like that. But ultimately, like, as long as you're not actually stealing, but you're experiencing it in expressing it with something else, but inspired by the first thing, people know that there is this concept of fair use that applies to those situations. That's like someone who created one piece can't stifle all the other creativity down the road, right? So I think that the legal framework actually is fine dealing with what everything, like all of this development. I think it's kind of just like there's always going to be incumbents who will not like the future.
Yeah. No, it definitely. And I think it's an altogether new form of expression. And whereas like a lot of people who would otherwise go with very traditional forms of art or sticking to certain mediums would definitely go and explore this. So I think that path seems like an interesting path to follow by.
yeah, I'm excited to see where it all leads ultimately.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yana. It was great talking to you about so many aspects of product and foundership and art. And I think to me, just to summarize all of these, it's like I guess both of us are so excited to see how PMs and product builders would look up at newer technologies, find out ways that would still help them build stuff with purpose for their customers, and at the end of the day, find so much joy and fun with what they do. So I'm very excited for what you've been doing with Kraftful, and just rooting for you as I always do. So yeah, all the best. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and yeah, really excited. Also really excited for the series. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you.